Carriere distalizer is a Classe II corrector. It is primarily a Classe II distalizer. Well, not primarily, it is exclusively a Classe II distalizer. And how it operates is that there's a little ball and socket joint back here in the posterior section that bonds to the maxillary first molar. When you run an elastic from the mandibular first molar up to the distalizer itself, you'll get a distal rotation of the maxillary first molar around the palatal root, and then pure distalization up to a full step from a Classe II into a Classe I platform. The idea being that you can utilize this prior to bracketing. So you can take some of your relatively complex Classe II cases and turn them into a nice, easy Classe I slam dunk before you ever put brackets on the case or anything like that. In addition to that, because you're using elastics at the front end, your patient compliance has a tendency to be significantly higher because they're far more excited about treatment, which is a really nice option. So instead of doing your Classe II at the end of treatment with, a twin force spike corrector or a forces appliance or who knows how many others, or doing it with a Herbst appliance at the front end, obviously with RX considerations thrown in there, you can use a Carriere distalizer, turn this into a nice Classe I platform, and then throw your brackets on and finish the case out. In addition, you can use it in the mixed dentition as a phase 1 appliance so that when the patient comes back to you for phase 2 treatment, they're in a really nice solid Classe I bite, and it's just a matter of throwing some brackets on and finishing the case out. So the anatomy of the distalizer, as you can see in this beautiful little fixed 15X model here, you've got the anterior portion here, which bonds either to the canine, or in cases where you have a severely rotated canine, or a canine that's kind of hung up in the palate, or blocked out and just basically inaccessible. We also have a smaller version which runs from the first bi to the first molar. This section, which kind of bypasses all the teeth in between, and then the posterior section here, which bonds to the maxillary first molar. One of the real nice things about this appliance is the molar rotation property. You've got that built in with this ball and socket joint. One of the nice things about it is that there are built-in stops. So once it gets fully rotated, it will not continue rotating and continue driving around. And in addition, there's a stop built into the appliance so that once it gets upright, it will not continue tipping the tooth. So after the initial uprighting and molar rotation, you'll get pure distalization of that entire posterior segment, again, from a Classe II into a Classe I platform. Different time frames have been quoted. Oh, just getting back to the actual appliance itself. The bonding pads are a micro-etched, basically a micro-etched bracket pad. So any of your traditional bonding adhesives will work. Whatever you're using for brackets should work fine, just fine for your distalizer. Pretty straightforward. Okay. Let me see what else. As far as anchorage goes, there are a couple of different options for anchorage. The primary option at the front end was kind of a lower lingual holding arch down here. So that minimizes any of your anterior flaring, just gives you a more solid base to work off of. We're seeing an increased number of temporary anchorage devices utilized as anchorage sources, or doing kind of like a lower Essex suck down, 7 to 7 with little cutouts on the 6s down here, and then running your elastic into like a direct bond button or something like that. That seems to be very popular, especially with the adult cases that may be going into something like Invisalign or something like that, or some kind of a clear aligner system. So those are kind of your options. You definitely want to use some sort of anchorage option, simply because if you don't, when you attach that elastic, you're using pretty heavy elastics at 6.5 ounce or 8.5 ounce, depending upon the case. So that elastic force will really drive those lower anterior teeth forward if you don't have some sort of an anchorage system in place. Okay, a couple of things to be wary of when you're using the appliance. This is phenomenal for Classe II deep bite tendency cases, primarily because you get your Classe II correction for one thing, but then you also get a little bit of a hyper eruption of that mandibular first molar. So if you've got a real nice deep bite case, it will have a tendency to open that bite up a little bit. Along those lines as well, if you've got a Classe II open bite case, it will continue opening the bite, and it could make it significantly worse. So just something to be aware of when you're using the appliance. If you've got a case where you've got a Classe II open bite and you still want to use the distalizer, your best bet's probably going to be to use something like a micro implant as your anchorage source, because you certainly don't want to anchor it off of that lower mandibular first molar. Okay. Measuring devices, you can use a standard millimeter ruler. The measurement is basically from the buccal indent here. I'm trying to get close to the camera, but the buccal indent of the maxillary first molar to about the midpoint of the canine or the midpoint of that first bi. And whatever that millimeter measurement is, that's essentially the size of the distalizer you want to use. So we have these little, I don't know if you can see it very well, but they're called distometers or distalizer rulers that come with every set. We can get some of these out to you if you're looking at implementing this into your practice. But you can also use a standard millimeter ruler, which works just fine. Now the distalizers are currently made of a stainless steel material. So if you get a distalizer and you have one in stock and you don't, it doesn't quite fit the case, or it doesn't fit the measurement that you've taken for it, if it's somewhere close, sometimes you can manipulate it a little bit because it is a stainless steel. You can flatten it out a little bit or push it together just a little bit. Just be careful that it doesn't really affect the posterior section too terribly much because you don't want it to impact those molar rotation properties. So they are made of a stainless steel, so if you've got a canine that's a little bit rotated, you can kind of bend this paddle around a little bit and get to it. As far as support materials, you put this down right here. We do have, I don't know if you can see it very well, but we do have kind of some patient brochures right here, which are really nice patient handouts. And then we have hygiene brochures, which are called It's Up to You, and that kind of walks through the distalizer and a bunch of other appliances and how to brush your teeth. It's an all-around hygiene brochure and an introduction to orthodontics, so it works very, very nicely for the patients. Distalizers come a couple of different ways. You can either get them in individual sets, which they look kind of like this. Beautiful little packaging. You get a right and a left in a set. You can also order them unilaterally if you'd like. So if you call in and if you're looking to do it on a unilateral case and you just need say a 25 right side, 25R would be the size you would order. If you want a set, it would be a 25 set. So that's a nice option to be able to use them unilaterally. We also have a master kit, which is the 3 most common canine to first molar and the 3 most common first bi to first molar options. So that's basically a quick little run through and introduction. We have a lot of other support materials, but I don't want to get into it very much. So if you have any questions, this will be posted to my YouTube page. You can link to that page and shoot me an email or comment on this video or